Okay, good morning, everyone. So today is our second online meeting and consultation. But today, instead of or aside from our consultation, I'm going to discuss few topics so that we could compensate some weeks na hindi natin nasunod. Ano po? So, yun. So to start with our discussion, uh, I'm going to present the objective for today's uh, meeting. So number one, so we will be reviewing the concepts of the cascading style sheet. And actually, yung discussion natin, our discussion for this period is until CSS lang siya. So, by next period, mag-start na tayo sa scripting, yung sa PHP, para makapag-create na tayo ng dynamic pages. So our topic for today's session are the following. Number one, so review of the concepts of cascading style sheet. So we'll go back to the concept so that if there are some things that still unclear in your part while reading the module, so today I'm going to demonstrate and expand your knowledge about what CSS really can do and how are you going to embed CSS in your HTML documents. CSS or Cascading Style Sheet is now one of the most popular tool or style document platform that we'll be using in HTML because it allows the web page to have a more pleasant and uh, uh, it aids us to design our page and view it in a manner that it contains let's say proper presentation on the page, because when you use HTML alone, so it's hindi masyado siyang na-appreciate kasi wala masyadong features of the design or aesthetics, but in CSS we can apply design to it. Aside from that, I'm going to discuss also the how are you going to apply CSS in styling text, backgrounds, and the box model for layouting. So let's continue. Okay. So let's go back to the topic that I started this semester, which is the cascading style sheet. So this is just a short discussion, a sort of review. Okay. So I'm going to discuss the benefits, the document structure of a CSS, writing style rules, how do we embed CSS into our document, how to attach CSS, what are inheritance. When you say inheritance, when you apply style sheet to a particular element, let's say for example in paragraph, does the contents of that paragraph element inherits the style sheet and applied it into another element. For example, when a paragraph has a nested element like paragraph in span, thus the contents of the span element can also be inherit the style that is being applied to paragraph. So pag-uusapan natin siya later. Cascading, the box model, and units we use. Majority of the activities you have seen the measurements like pixels, the points in setting the sizes, the width, the height. So what are those other units of measurement that you can use in your CSS document? Okay. Now, one of the benefit of using CSS is it has a precise layout control. The primary reason of applying CSS is when you define HTML, you just creating a structure of a particular document. When you say structure, the building blocks of the document. Now, the purpose of CSS is you can define a precise measurement, the precise layout, the location of the document using the cascading style sheet. It's really impossible for us to do that in HTML alone because HTML can do perform colors and backgrounds, but it has limitation. So CSS can apply with a limitless possibility of how you can control your document. So when you apply CSS, you are applying a list work job. Why is that? So when you apply CSS, for example, in this three example figures, these websites content are the same, but in terms of design, there are differences in terms of the colors, the layout, etc. And the manner of providing presentation is different. So CSS allows you to control how your page should be displayed and provide design into your user's perspective. So for example, in these three figures, so CSS can change anything in your page, no? So that's the purpose of CSS. Although you have the exact HTML sources, but you can apply different style to it depending on your what you want your page to look like. So that's the benefit of CSS. You can control even if your page contains several pages, you can control the entire website using CSS. Accessibility, so it's a markup stay semantic. When we say markup semantic, so we can access all the possible features that we can do in your CSS document. Flexible, so says very flexible because the same HTML markup can be made to appear dramatically different ways. Just like in our example, so even if they are the same page but different in presentation, so that's how CSS controls your page. Okay. Okay. Now, how does style sheet work? So style sheet start with markup document like HTML, but could be another XML markup language. So usually we encounter CSS in most HTML markup languages. So second, you write styles and you try to identify how you want your element to look like. Like for example, you want the content to display left, center, right, or justified. You want it to color red, blue, depending on your perspective or depending on your needs. So aside from that, after you write CSS, you attach them into your, let's say, entire document or entire website, or you can attach it into an element alone, or you want to attach the CSS styles into the whole paragraph or the entire section of the page. So that's how you apply CSS depending on how you want it affect the markup of your HTML page. And also, one of the benefits of CSS is it actually supported by most browsers. So the browser uses instructions when rendering your elements. So it renders your page depending on what your CSS styles you want them to display in your browser. Now, in applying CSS, it's like in programming, we apply rules. How do you properly apply CSS? For example, in this particular example that we have in our presentation, this is an example of how we write CSS. You start with the element that you want to be affected by your CSS. This one is your declaration, which means declaration, what you want your page to look, or what will you apply to your elements. Like for example, I want to apply color green. This is your selector. Example, this is selector or the element. And in your declaration, we have properties. This is called properties. When you say properties, properties are characteristics of your element. Let's say height, width, alignment, margins, etc. And this one is the value that you are applying to that particular property. Okay, so in this particular rule, you are trying to make your H1 element color green. It's like a command that when your browser reads these CSS rules that you declared, it applies the property and the value to that particular element. Okay, and you can also apply that in available elements in CSS like strong, or this one is an element that allows your paragraph to make a bold paragraph, but in this case we use that element to become a CSS rule, and applying a declaration that any text in your paragraph or in your page will be colored red with an italic font style. So that's how you apply CSS. That's the rule of writing CSS. You can write multiple declarations, or you can write multiple properties and apply it to your element. So it's depending on what you want your page to look like. Okay. Now, so this is the proper syntax of declaring your CSS rules. So the first thing you need to do is to create or declare a selector. Selector means it can be an element like h1, paragraph, let's say the body tag. Aside from that, there are a few things that you could do, like you want a custom or customized selector, like let's say my paragraph, as long as it doesn't have a space, or my page. So this is a custom based selector name, or you can use the dot, let's say page. Okay, so this is an example of ID selector. Okay, and this is an example of class selector. Okay, so you can, selector can be any elements or either of the two, the ID and the class selectors. Okay, how's my audio? Clear pa rin ba? Okay lang? Okay lang? Okay, thank you.
Clear
Now,
po.
okay, thank you. Aside from that, so you can declare multiple rules, or let's say declaration. We call this declaration. It can be in a block form of block. Okay, something like this, which means you are mixing those properties together with the respective values and property. So in either way, it's either you write your declaration in a single line or multiple line, the same with this example. Okay, so that's how you write rules in particular CSS document. Okay, so first is selectors. Selectors are the type of rule that you are going to apply to your CSS. So we have several things that you can do, like the element selector and the ID selector, as well as the class selector. In element, you just type the, let's say, paragraph tag, or h1, h2, and so on. Any selector that you can find in HTML document, you can apply CSS to it. And also you can use ID selector, but the difference between ID and the element is that, for example, you embed this particular, or you write this rule into your CSS doc or HTML document, any paragraph inside your HTML document can be applied or imitate or inherit the property that you set. Okay, for example, let's have some demonstration. I have here a simple page. Okay, so yeah, so I have here a simple page. Now, as you can see in this page, we have several tags and elements that we can find, like the body, the header. So any element that you can find inside the body tag element, you can identify, you can set a CSS rule to it, like example, the nav or navigation, etc. So anything here you can apply CSS to it, as long as it's a valid tag and it contains elements or contain text. Now I'm going to demonstrate an example. Okay, This is an example of embedding a CSS document inside your HTML. Okay. Now, let's try applying the example. Let's say paragraph. In this case, any content or any paragraph that are present inside my document, this rule will be applied to them. So there is no exception. So for example, we have several paragraphs here. We have 1, 2 paragraphs. So meaning this rule will be applied to these 2 paragraphs. So let's say color red. So I'm going to apply red. So let's save. So I'm going to open the document. Okay. So please wait. I'm going to open. So let's try to open another. Later, I'm going to discuss where to put properly your CSS document. Okay, so now I have here a page which contains okay. Okay. Oops. Unclose. Where to find that paragraph? Okay. Let's try to remove this one. First, okay, so now, as you can see, all the paragraphs that are present in my document is now colored red. So, I was wondering why the style document doesn't accept this text. Let's try this one. Because I'm used to write off stylish with the properties. Okay, so now it's okay now. Now, so now I embed a style sheet in my document. So let us continue. Okay, you can also apply using ID selector. So you just provide a unique name. So anything that you want to apply. But when you use the ID selector, you can only use this once because ID means a unique element. Okay, you cannot reuse them to other pages or other part of your document. Okay, so in this example, we have the declaration. So this is what you call declaration. You try to declare a rule. Color red, font size, margin, and opacity. Okay, so which means you are setting that the H1 or H2 is being modified by your CSS rule. So let's say for example, font size 12 pixels. Okay, something like that. So that's how you apply your CSS rule into your page. Okay, so let's continue. Okay, so make sure it is contained in a curly braces. Do not forget that, because once you forget that, it will be discarded by your browser, which means it's not a proper declaration of CSS rule. Okay, now make sure when you write your CSS rule, make sure you have a termination of a particular rule. Like for example, this one, semicolon, which means this is the end of the particular rule that you need to, or property that you need to apply. Okay, now let's continue. Okay, declaration, each declaration with semicolon, white space is ignored, so you can stack declaration. So the purpose of doing this arrangement is just for readability purposes. You can write your CSS rules depending on your let's say for example you want it to stack in one line, something like that, or as long as you write the proper syntax of writing the rules. Next, okay, properties are defined in CSS specification, so values are dependent on the type of property. So measurement, keywords, colors, and more. So values are depending on properties. When you say property, let's say for example, font size, so you can just provide sizes, pixels, etc. You cannot put font size and allow your value to add value to font size as red. No, it's not the property of the font size to become red. So it's really important to identify the proper value to a property. Okay, next, comments. You can write comments by writing this one. So the purpose of this is for readability. It is being ignored by a browser. It is useful for notes, for you to be able to identify the purpose of your CSS rules. So okay, so there are 3 ways that you can do to add your CSS style in the document. The one that I demonstrated is embedded style, which means you are applying your CSS style at the head portion of your page, which means any part of the document that contains paragraph, these rules will be applied to them because the CSS is declared at the top portion of your page. CSS should be embedded inside the head tag. So, and in this particular rule, the paragraph will be colored red in size 12. So any element that are present in your body tag, let's say paragraph, these properties will be applied to them. Now, aside from that, aside from embedding, we have inline method. So inline method is the properties or values are added into an individual element. For example, when do we use inline method? Inline method can be used depending on your purpose. Let's say for example, since this paragraph rule is being applied to the entire paragraph element in my page, what if I have a single paragraph that I want to customize, just a single paragraph only? So you can just provide inline method to it. For example, you just put style property into that element, and you can now write your CSS rule. Example, color, let's say blue. The application of CSS is depending upon your purpose. For example, it's not really advisable to put inline method in the entire page of your document, because what if there are modifications that should be made? So it's really tiring to edit the entire content because your style sheet is inline method. So the purpose of inline method is for small modifications only, but for applying the rule to be applied into majority of your page, you should put them inside the head element, something like this one. Okay, so you can put any or as many rules as you want, but it's really hard to track if there are certain errors that are occurred in the display of your page, so I advise to use it's either the embedded or the external method. Now, the third one is the external. Now, what's the purpose of external method? Let's say, for example, let's have some demonstration why we have the third one. Okay, for example, so I'm going to, okay, now, in this case, let's say, for example, you have several pages. Okay, and of course, if you want to develop your website, let's assume that the design of these 3 pages are the same, but they have different contents, right? Now, it's really time consuming that when you design the first page, you use the embedded method and you try to copy paste this one and embed it here and here. So what if there is a modification that should be made? So which means you are going to edit the 3 documents and you open it one by one and modify the changes that you want to modify. So it's time consuming. Now, the purpose of external method is to create an independent style sheet that can be applied to those documents. And if you want to modify some things or rules that you want to change in your pages, you just have to modify the single page only. So you will be linking this document, CSS documents, into your page. So that's external methods, and that's the purpose of external method. You have a general style document that can be modified anytime that you want, and it can be applied to the entire page that link to it. Okay, so let's try creating one. Now, how do we create the external method? So let's say you have a document. So in this example, let's say we have, okay, let's say for example, so this is our page. This is the page that I am demonstrating right now. So the first thing you need to do is to create a document called CSS. So let's try creating one. So you have blank document here. So you need to save this document as CSS file. Okay. By the way, this discussion is the missing content in our module. So I did not attach it yet because I don't want to populate the contents of 1 week module. So this is the continuation of it. So now, okay, make sure when you want to create an external method, you save the document as CSS. For example, style.css. Make sure this is all files. By the way, I'm using Sublime. You can also create your CSS rules in Notepad. Make sure naka all files siya. Okay. In Sublime, there is a file type called CSS, so it's easier for me to create one. But for the purpose of creating my custom page or custom style sheet, so I'm just using the all files, and I just need to put in the CSS extension name. So save. Okay. Okay. I'm using unregistered version because it's just a free copy. Now let's check our folder. Okay, so now I have this new document called style.css. So if you try to identify the type of this document, it should be a style document. So .css, Cascade style document. Okay, now after creating your document, what you need to do now is to write your CSS rule. For example, I want my body element inside my page to be font. Okay, font family. Let's say Arial. Okay, so yeah, that's how you write rules. It's just like copying this one and pasting it into a separate file. Then, how do we apply that into your documents. So the first thing you need to do is to write a link tag. So link. Okay. The property of this is style sheet. Okay. Which means you are linking a document, and the relationship between this page into that document is the page that you are trying to link is the style sheet, and the type is text CSS and href. Oh, sorry. Okay. href equals, okay, you have to put in your file name for your CSS. So again, the syntax for embedding your external page or external file of your CSS rules to your page is, first you need to write the real method or the real tag or element, followed by the link element, followed by the real property, which is relation, style sheet. The type is text CSS, this will be this one, and the link, so style.css, the file name. If your style sheet is contained inside the folder, so you have to mention the folder name. For example, I have a folder called CSS, and the style.css is saved inside that folder, so you have to mention it. And make sure, to be able to link it properly, make sure your CSS is the same directory with your HTML. Like, for example, in this particular example, I have these two documents inside the material folder, so it's for you to be able to easier to locate that file. So make sure they are contained inside the same directory. Okay, now to let's try to test it. Okay, so our objective is to change the font of this document to Arial. So let's try to refresh them. Oops. Okay, let's try to check style sheet. Okay, spelling. Okay, make sure you have a correct spelling. Okay, so now the entire content of my page is now Arial. But notice what happened. Although I have two documents, although I have two set of rules, the first one is contained inside the external style sheet and the other one is embedded. Notice how your browser applies those rules without conflicting to one another. Okay, so you can also apply these three methods at the same time, but it depends upon your purpose. Okay, in this case, let's say for example, what if I have three documents? Let's say for example, I have three documents. Okay, let's try to erase this one. Okay, what if, let's say I have two documents. I have two documents, HTML documents. So this one is .html, another one is .html. Okay, and this one is your CSS. Okay, let's say for example, you write rule that sets the color of the paragraph to blue, something like that, semicolon. So when you apply that rule, it will be also applied to the same or to the two documents. But what if the paragraph inside the HTML number 2 is color blue? So how do you do that? Since this particular rule applied to that paragraph, so and you want to modify the paragraph inside the document number 2 to become blue, so there are several ways we can do that. The most common way is to create your CSS rule inside the document itself and create a rule. We call that embedding, because in writing CSS or embedding CSS, the most powerful one is the inline, followed by embedding, followed by the external. So therefore, when you write rule in this particular document that says the color of the paragraph is red, your page will follow the external method, and that rule will be overwritten by the rule inside the embedding method. So let's run. I have declared the external red and the embedded as blue. So let's try what will happen to our page. So in this case, let's run. Okay, so as you notice, okay, color blue. Oh, where is that? Okay, blue. Did I save this one? Color red. Okay. By the way, notice what happened is it did not apply here. Why is that? Because the link is actually written below. So which means when your page is rendered, it applies actually blue to your paragraph. But then when your paragraph reads the external method, it actually applies. Okay, the last rule. Okay, so now it's now color blue. A while ago, this link method is declared after the embedding method. So that's why it is colored red, something like that. Okay, so make sure you have a proper we call that sequence that you need to apply. Okay, now question so far? Question so far in terms of application? Again, if you want to attach your CSS rules in your document, it can be external, which means you have a separate document. It can be embedded, which means inside the head tag, or inline method. Okay. Okay, so these are the example link, or you can use import also. Instead of writing this one, the most common way is to write this one, import. Okay, something like that. So let's try that one. Instead of writing this one, we'll be using this one. So import. Okay, so then followed by the URL. So don't forget that sign. Okay, URL, which means you are trying to identify the path where your CSS file is. Since I don't have any folders or folder contained, or I did not contain my CSS file into a folder, so I just write this style .css. If you have multiple style sheet rules, you can add something like this one. So style number 2, something like that. Okay, so you can put as many CSS rules or document in your page, as many as you want. Okay, so now you have to put import URL, the name, the path, the name of the file, and semicolon. So let's try. If color red, let's try. Let's remove this one. Let's see if we can apply the color red one. So I'm just commented the line. Okay, as you can see, it's now color red because the import method applies the external rule of the paragraph. Okay, so yeah. Question so far? Question? Andyan pa ba kayo? Hello? Hello? Hi?
Ano po?
Yes?
Ang link tsaka ang import.
Ano po yun? Pwede yung pagsabayin? Pwede. Ano pa? Pwede yun kung gusto mo. As long as tama yung pagkakalagay mo, pwede yun.
Okay po. Thank you.
Okay. Any other question? Okay, we proceed? Okay, proceed tayo. Okay, already discuss this one. Sinortcut ko na lang Okay, inline method. Okay, document structure. Pag-usapan natin to. Now, as you can see in my demonstration, the style sheet that is being declared outside, embedded, etc. Any element that is particularly created inside the body tag or the head tag. So, for example, you have this set of elements. So, in your document, you have H1, 2 paragraph, H2, and a paragraph, and H2. So, inside your paragraph, you have an emphasized element. So, this one, any CSS rule that you set with that paragraph will also be applied to the element inside that particular element. We call that inheritance. In Tagalog, namamana. So, namamana niya yung styles na sinet mo sa paragraph. Since under siya, or it's being written under the paragraph tag. Okay? So, let's say for example, if you have two emphasized elements in your paragraph, when you declare paragraph style sheet, this rule will also be applied inside the element and up to the other elements inside that particular element. So that's inheritance. Okay, I hope malino siya. So which means, for example, let's create this document again for further explanation. Okay, so for example, so let's erase this one. Let's talk about inheritance. Okay. For example, in your document, you have, let's say, header element. Okay. Okay. Now, there are several sets of elements, something like that, close paragraph, and another, let's say, H1, something like that. Okay, meron siyang content, H1, something like that. Okay, let's close the header element. Head element is different from header, ha? Okay. Now, if you create a style rule that, let's say for example, I want to create a style rule that apply, let's erase this one. That applies to my HTML content with an header element. Let's say for example, okay, I'm not used to writing using a mouse. Anyway, so this is the black, and you set, let's say, color. Let's say pink, something like that. Now, what will happen to this rule is it will be applied to the element inside of header element. That's what you call inheritance. Any rule that you apply to an element, since there is corresponding, we call that parang child yun na to. So, elements that are inside to another element, those elements will inherit the style sheet that you applied to the parent element. This is now your parent element. Parent, this is your child element. So, did you understand now what inheritance is? Yes? Kuha na?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Very good. Okay, so let's move forward. Okay, let me look for my... Okay, now. So, some properties inherit, others do not. Properties related to text usually inherit, properties related to layout generally don't. So, which means, only text elements or text rules are applied, but in layout, like floating, like margin, so hindi siya masyadong na-apply. So, styles explicitly apply to a specific element override inherited styles. Okay, you learn to use inheritance strategically to keep your style rules simple. Okay, cascading. Cascade refers to the system of resolving conflicts when several styles apply to the same element. Now, in some other cases, based on my experience, there are several styles that I need to apply, but then some of them, unknowingly, there is a conflict between those two style sheets. Let's say, for example, I applied, let's say I have documents here. This is HTML and this is style sheet. This is what I mentioned a while ago. I have CSS here and I declare paragraph, and also under the HTML document I also declare paragraph rule. So what happened is there is a conflict between these rules, two rules. So what will happen? So you can also apply cascade rule in order to set priority which of these two styles will be applied. Okay, so or we have rule order, something like that. So that is cascading. What I did a while ago is that I changed the order in which this CSS is linked to the document. Instead of writing the document import after the style method, let's say for example, so after writing this one at the top, which means this one is not the priority, something like that. This is cascading. So let's continue. Okay, so aside from that, you can also set cascade priority. When you say priority, you are making your style sheet as a priority rule. For example, even if I make this one something like this, let's try to okay, something like that. Notice, since this one, let's say comment. So we are expecting that the color of the paragraph, aside from this one, since color blue siya, this makes the paragraph, last paragraph, priority, and this one is lesser priority. So let's try. Okay, notice this one is color blue again, since this, let's say pink. Pink. Okay, now this is color pink now. Let's change that green. Okay, now this is now prioritized because of this inline method. So what if I want this to become a priority? So I put important. Important. Okay, so let's apply the changes.
naman po, sir. Confused naman. Lang po.